What would you do if you discovered a child smarter than anyone you've ever known, capable of changing the world, but trapped in a reality no one ever saw coming? It's a question that lingers in your mind, isn't it? The kind of question that pulls at the edge of your curiosity, begging for an answer but never quite giving one. And that's exactly how Emily's story begins, quietly, almost innocently, until everything changes. It's not every day that someone discovers a 10-year-old girl who is smarter than anyone you've ever known, and I'm not talking about some child prodigy who can play piano by age 3 or solve simple math equations before kindergarten. Emily is something different. Something much more dangerous. I want you to imagine this: you're scrolling through your phone, distracted by the endless noise of the internet. News stories flood your feed, most of them about politics, celebrity drama, or the latest tech scandals. But then, one video catches your eye, a simple grainy recording from a science fair in some small town you've never heard of. The title reads, "This 10-year-old just outsmarted a room full of billionaires." Naturally, you click. Who wouldn't? In the video, a little girl stands before a panel of high-profile investors. She's small, no older than 10, wearing a purple hoodie and round glasses that are too big for her face. She's not even nervous. In fact, she's calm, almost unnervingly so, when she begins to explain her project. "This is how we can revolutionize communication by using neural synchronization," she says, looking directly into the camera. The room is silent, and at first, it's not clear if anyone understands what she just said. The investors look at each other, exchanging uncomfortable glances. But as the girl continues to explain, the silence grows, and you can sense that something remarkable is unfolding. She's talking about artificial intelligence, but not the way anyone else has talked about it. She's talking about something far beyond what the current generation of tech moguls, even the Elon Musks and Jeff Bezoses of the world, have ever dared to dream about. She isn't just proposing some new app or a better way to design a computer. She's offering a new understanding of human connection itself, an entirely new approach to how we communicate with each other and with machines. And the most surprising part? It's all based on something so simple, it's almost laughable. She's not building a futuristic robot. She's not talking about the latest hardware. Instead, she's presenting a concept, a way to bridge the gap between artificial intelligence and human emotion. A way to give machines the ability to truly understand us, to feel empathy. By the time the video ends, the room is a mixture of awe and disbelief. The investors, who once saw themselves as the smartest people in the room, are speechless. Some of them even laugh nervously, unsure if they should take the little girl seriously. But Emily doesn't notice the laughter. She's already turned away, ready to continue her project, leaving behind a trail of stunned silence. I can't help but wonder, what if she's right? It's a thought that should scare you, and it should thrill you at the same time. Because what she's talking about isn't just some cool tech idea. If she's right, if this young girl has discovered a way to make AI feel and think like humans, then everything we know about technology, society, and even the future of humanity could be turned upside down. As you sit there, watching her on your screen, you begin to ask yourself, who is she? Where did she come from? And how did she, at just 10 years old, come to understand something that has eluded the brightest minds in the world? But here's the kicker, this isn't just about an invention or an idea. This is about Emily's journey, a journey that will challenge the world's understanding of intelligence, ethics, and power. Her story begins in a small town, far removed from the glossy boardrooms of Silicon Valley, where she grew up in a modest apartment with her mother, a woman who once dreamed of a better life but never quite had the means to achieve it. Emily's mother, Sarah, had always known that her daughter was different. From an early age, Emily showed signs of extraordinary intellect. She could read before she was 3, solve complex math problems by the time she was 5, and by the age of 7, she had already taught herself several programming languages. But Emily's brilliance wasn't the thing that made her stand out, it was her heart. Unlike the children around her, Emily wasn't obsessed with toys or video games. Instead, she spent hours reading books on artificial intelligence, psychology, and even philosophy. She was fascinated not by how machines worked, but by how people thought, how we interacted with one another, and how emotions could be understood and even replicated in machines. Her mother, who worked long hours as a nurse, didn't have the time or resources to nurture Emily's curiosity the way she might have liked. But she always encouraged her daughter's interest in science, offering support when she could, even if it meant sacrificing her own dreams. It wasn't until Emily turned 9 that things began to change. That's when she built her first prototype, a small, humble machine that could read facial expressions and offer empathetic responses. It wasn't perfect, of course. But it was a start. A glimpse into something much bigger. And that's when the world began to take notice. It started small. A few tech bloggers picked up on the story of the little girl who could read emotions better than most adults. Then came the local news, and finally, the big names in the tech world, the billionaires, the investors, the CEOs. They all heard about her. They all wanted a piece of her. But Emily wasn't interested in their money, their fame, or their power. She had one goal in mind, to make the world a better place. And that's where her story really begins. As the camera zooms in on her face in that viral video, you might see something that everyone else misses. Something that should have been a red flag to those investors who laughed her off. A look in her eyes that says, "I'm not just playing in your game, I'm changing the rules." And that, my friend, is what makes her different. This isn't some cute story about a child prodigy. This is the beginning of something much larger. A revolution. And you're just getting started. So, let me ask you again, what would you do if you discovered a 10-year-old girl who could change everything? Because that's exactly what Emily is about to do. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? To understand why Emily is the way she is, we need to go back, way back, to the quiet streets of a small town in North Carolina, where she grew up with only her mother by her side. Sarah, Emily's mother, wasn't the kind of woman who inspired people with her fame or fortune. She worked as a nurse, often pulling long shifts at the local hospital, and when she came home, exhausted and worn out, she didn't have much left to give. But she gave everything she had to Emily. Life wasn't easy for them. They didn't have much in terms of money, and there were times when Sarah had to decide between paying the electric bill or buying Emily a new pair of shoes. But despite the financial struggles, Sarah always made sure Emily never felt like she lacked anything important: love, support, and the belief that she could accomplish anything she set her mind to. Emily's father was absent from her life from the very beginning. Sarah rarely spoke about him, except to say that he wasn't someone to count on. For Emily, that absence never bothered her. She never questioned it. In her eyes, her mother was the whole world, and that was all that mattered. But that didn't mean that growing up was easy for Emily. Unlike the other children in her neighborhood, she had little interest in playing outside or watching cartoons. She wasn't particularly interested in making friends either. Instead, Emily spent her time reading. She would spend hours curled up in a corner of their small living room, flipping through books that most kids her age wouldn't even understand, books on artificial intelligence, human psychology, neuroscience. Even as young as 5 or 6, she devoured these books as if they were her lifeblood. Her curiosity wasn't just about learning things. It was about understanding the world in a way no one else seemed to. Emily had this deep need to know why things were the way they were, why people acted the way they did, why the world functioned the way it did. It wasn't just about the what or how. She wanted to understand the why of everything. That's where things started to get interesting. At age 7, Emily began writing simple computer programs, nothing fancy, but enough to make her realize that the world of machines could be a tool to understand humanity. Her first program? A basic chatbot. It wasn't anything groundbreaking, but she was fascinated by the idea that a machine could learn to mimic human interaction. From there, she started experimenting with ways to make machines not just understand words, but to feel them. But let's be clear, Emily wasn't your typical child prodigy. She didn't have that competitive edge that many gifted children did. She didn't care about impressing others, and she certainly didn't seek the approval of her teachers or peers. Emily wasn't driven by the usual desire for accolades or recognition. What she was driven by was something deeper. She wanted to create something that could change the way people lived, something that could genuinely improve their lives by understanding the deepest aspects of their emotions. Her mother, Sarah, always encouraged Emily's interests. In a way, Sarah was living vicariously through her daughter, nurturing a dream that had never been fully realized in her own life. Sarah had always been interested in science and technology, but growing up in a small town with few opportunities, she never had the chance to follow those dreams. When Emily showed an affinity for these subjects, Sarah encouraged her as best as she could, even if it meant sacrificing things for herself. But even Sarah couldn't keep up with Emily's growing brilliance. The gap between their knowledge widened at a pace that was both awe-inspiring and, at times, terrifying. By the time Emily was 8, she had surpassed her mother's understanding of computers and technology. Emily was now programming sophisticated algorithms and learning more about AI than anyone had expected a child to know. The turning point came when Emily was 9. That was when she built her first real working prototype, the emotional recognition machine. It was, at first, a small handheld device with a screen that could read facial expressions and analyze the emotional states of the people it interacted with. Simple in design, yes. But in theory? Groundbreaking. At first, Sarah didn't know what to make of it. "It's just a toy, honey," she'd said, trying to reassure her. But Emily's response was calm. "It's not a toy, Mom. It's a new way of understanding people. It's the first step toward making machines feel what we feel." Emily wasn't interested in just understanding emotions. She wanted machines to respond, to feel them too. She wanted to build a bridge between humans and technology, a bridge that wasn't based on logic and data alone but on the very things that make us human. Despite her lack of formal education in the subject, Emily's understanding of AI and neuroscience seemed to surpass even the most established tech experts. She didn't just read books and experiment on her own. She absorbed everything she could from the world around her, from observing how people interacted to studying advanced theories in artificial intelligence and machine learning. But it wasn't the science that interested her most, it was the humanity behind it. The emotions. The nuances. The ways that algorithms could learn to navigate the complexities of human experience. And that's when the world began to take notice. It started small, like all revolutions do. A few local tech enthusiasts stumbled upon her project, impressed by the fact that a child had created something so sophisticated. But then, it began to spread. Word got out to the larger tech world. Bloggers and journalists began writing about her. And before anyone knew it, Emily was being invited to science fairs, summits, and conventions where she was asked to present her groundbreaking work. At the age of 10, she had already outpaced the best minds in technology. And it was only a matter of time before the world realized what Emily could really do. What no one knew, what they could never have expected, was that Emily wasn't just building technology for the sake of building it. She was building it with a purpose. Emily didn't want fame. She didn't want recognition. She wanted to connect. And that's what made her different from all the others. She wasn't out to become a tech mogul. She was out to change the very fabric of how humanity and technology interacted. And as she stood at the podium, speaking about her project at the science fair, no one could have predicted what would happen next. The world was on the verge of a shift that would come not from the hands of corporate giants but from a child who had only just begun to understand the immense power of her own mind. But here's the question that hangs in the air, unanswered. How far would Emily go to make her vision a reality? And more importantly, who would stop her? Emily's journey, from the quiet streets of North Carolina to the front row of global innovation, wasn't going to be as smooth as the tech giants and investors made it seem. In fact, it was only a matter of time before her groundbreaking ideas, and the very force of her intellect, would start to ruffle feathers, both within the tech community and beyond. The first signs of conflict were subtle, at first. There were the whispers behind closed doors, the raised eyebrows when she spoke at conferences, and the mild disinterest from some of the so-called experts in the room. But it didn't take long for things to shift. One afternoon, Emily was invited to speak at a prestigious technology summit in Silicon Valley, an event that attracted some of the most influential names in the industry. Her talk, centered around the potential for emotional intelligence in AI, was supposed to be the highlight of the event. At just 10 years old, Emily was about to present a concept that had the potential to change everything, a new way of thinking about technology, one that acknowledged the depth of human emotion and empathy. But as soon as she stepped onto the stage, there was an immediate shift in the atmosphere. A few of the more established figures in the crowd exchanged skeptical glances, while others simply frowned, unsure of how to process the young girl before them. Her presence, while undoubtedly impressive, made some uncomfortable. After all, how could a child, barely a teenager, have anything of value to say about the future of AI? "I'm here to talk about a way for machines to learn emotions," Emily began, her voice clear, calm, and unwavering. "I believe that machines can do more than just process data. They can understand us, feel what we feel, by learning from how we express ourselves." The audience remained silent, some nodding politely, others clearly unsure of how to respond. But then, one prominent tech entrepreneur in the front row stood up. His name was Nathan Coleman, the CEO of a major AI company, known for his cutting-edge work in machine learning. With a condescending smile, he interrupted. "That's all well and good, Emily. But don't you think we're getting a little ahead of ourselves? AI isn't about feelings. It's about logic. Data. Pure, unemotional thinking." The crowd chuckled. Nathan Coleman was a well-respected figure, someone who had made billions with his innovations, and no one dared challenge him, except Emily. "Actually, Mr. Coleman, I disagree," Emily responded, her voice calm but firm. "I think you're missing the point. Emotions are what make us human. If we want AI to truly understand us, it has to learn to feel, not just think." Her words cut through the room like a knife. It wasn't just her intellect that shocked them, it was her confidence. Most adults would have backed down in the face of a room full of powerful figures, but Emily didn't flinch. She didn't see herself as a child in that moment, she saw herself as an equal, and the room began to feel the weight of her presence. "Emotions don't belong in AI," Coleman snapped back, visibly irritated now. "If machines start to feel, then what happens? Who controls them? Who decides what's right or wrong? The whole point of AI is to eliminate bias, not introduce it." The debate escalated quickly, and while Emily remained calm, her words were cutting through the defense of the tech giants. And it was clear that Coleman's objection wasn't just about the technology, it was about power. About control. The audience began to murmur, sensing the conflict intensifying. It wasn't just a debate about AI anymore. It was a battle for the future of technology itself. One side, led by Emily, saw the potential for a more compassionate, humanized approach to AI, an AI that could understand and respond to human emotions in a meaningful way. The other side, represented by people like Nathan Coleman, believed that emotion had no place in AI. Logic, precision, and control were the only values that mattered. After the summit, things began to take a darker turn. Emily's critics grew louder, and the people who had once been her biggest supporters started to back away. The media, too, began to turn. Headlines that had once hailed Emily as a prodigy now questioned her motives. "Is she too young to understand the consequences?" one article asked. "Does a child's vision of AI make sense in the real world?" another speculated. The public began to debate whether a 10-year-old girl should really be the face of a technological revolution. But Emily wasn't bothered. In fact, the conflict only made her more determined. She wasn't interested in the fame, the praise, or the recognition. She wasn't even interested in the money that would inevitably come with her ideas. She was on a mission to change the world in a way no one else could see, not yet. And she knew that no revolution was ever easy. But the more Emily advanced, the more she began to see the cracks in the system. People didn't just resist her ideas because they didn't understand them, they resisted because they felt threatened. A world where machines could understand emotions meant a world where humans could no longer hide their own. A world where artificial intelligence wasn't just about productivity but about empathy was a world that would force people to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves. As Emily sat alone in her room one night, reviewing data on her latest project, she couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was at play. She had come to realize that her work wasn't just about AI or technology, it was about power. Those in control of technology controlled the narrative, controlled the future. And she was a threat to that. What scared people most wasn't the idea of AI understanding emotion, it was the idea of losing control. Emily wasn't just challenging their ideas about machines, she was challenging their entire system of power, of who gets to decide the future. But Emily wasn't afraid. She knew what she was up against. She wasn't naive enough to think that a 10-year-old girl could just waltz into the world of billionaires and innovators and expect them to hand over the reins of power. But that wasn't her goal. Her goal wasn't to play their game. It was to change it entirely. As she lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, Emily made a decision. She would continue her work, no matter the opposition. She had a responsibility now, a responsibility to the world to see her vision through. And she knew that, in the end, the world would have no choice but to catch up. But as the conflict heated up, Emily began to wonder one thing. How far would she be willing to go to fight for her vision? And who would she have to sacrifice in the process? Emily had always known that her path would be difficult. But nothing could have prepared her for the level of resistance she would face in the coming months. The deeper she ventured into the world of AI, the more she realized that it wasn't just about algorithms and code, it was about influence, money, and the ability to shape the future in ways that most people couldn't even fathom. It all started after the Silicon Valley summit. The tension between Emily and the established tech moguls was palpable. Nathan Coleman's public criticism only marked the beginning of a series of strategic moves against her. The battle lines had been drawn, and Emily was no longer just a child with a dream, she was now a threat. After the summit, Emily's team of advisors, people who had been supporting her from the beginning, started to notice something strange. Some of them began to pull back, as if they feared getting caught up in the firestorm. Some were convinced that her ideas were too radical and that the world wasn't ready for the kind of AI she envisioned. Others simply didn't want to cross powerful players like Nathan Coleman, whose influence could destroy careers. But Emily couldn't afford to slow down. She knew the stakes. This wasn't just about making a name for herself, it was about something much bigger. She was fighting for a future where AI could be more than just a tool for efficiency. It could be a companion, a partner, a reflection of our own humanity. But to bring that vision to life, she would need more than just support from well-meaning individuals. She needed the resources, the infrastructure, and the backing of people who understood her vision, or at least, she hoped they would. The first breakthrough came when Emily was invited to a private meeting with a group of powerful tech investors. It was one of those rare opportunities that most entrepreneurs would kill for. These investors weren't just interested in making a profit, they were interested in the future. They had heard about Emily's work, and they wanted to see if she was the real deal. The meeting took place in a sleek, modern boardroom, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the sprawling city of San Francisco. Emily, looking every bit the part of the young prodigy, sat at the head of the table, surrounded by people far older and more experienced than her. But she wasn't intimidated. She had come here with a purpose, to pitch her vision for a new kind of AI, one that could understand, respond to, and even feel emotions. The investors listened intently as Emily spoke, outlining her ideas with the same clarity and confidence she had shown at the summit. She explained her emotional recognition machine, a system that could revolutionize how machines interacted with people. She talked about her belief that AI should go beyond cold calculations and learn to interpret the complexities of human emotions, something that would allow machines to respond not just logically, but compassionately. But as Emily spoke, she noticed a subtle shift in the room. The investors, who had initially seemed intrigued, began to exchange glances. A few of them whispered to one another, clearly uncomfortable with the direction Emily's vision was taking. Finally, one of the investors, a woman named Rachel Lee, spoke up. Rachel was known for her ruthless pragmatism and had a reputation for making cold, calculated business decisions. "I have to be honest with you, Emily," Rachel said, her voice measured. "Your idea is fascinating, no doubt. But you're asking for a level of emotional intelligence in machines that goes beyond anything we've seen before. It's risky, unpredictable. And frankly, I don't think the world is ready for this kind of technology." Emily paused. She wasn't surprised. She had known that people would push back against her ideas, but hearing it from someone like Rachel stung more than she expected. She had built up her entire vision on the belief that the world could be ready, that machines could change not just how we work, but how we relate to each other. "I believe the world is ready," Emily replied, her voice unwavering. "We've spent so much time building machines that can outthink us, but we haven't stopped to think about how those machines can care about us. We need a technology that's not just about doing things for us, it needs to be about understanding us." The room fell silent. Rachel studied Emily carefully, her expression unreadable. Finally, she sighed. "Look, I get where you're coming from. I really do. But what you're proposing could backfire. Imagine a world where machines can not only recognize emotions, but also manipulate them. People could use this technology to control others. It could lead to some dangerous consequences. That's a risk I'm not willing to take." Rachel's words hung heavy in the air. Emily had been warned about the dangers of her ideas, the fear that machines could become too powerful, too unpredictable. But she had never expected it to come from someone who claimed to care about the future of technology. "I'm not asking you to make that leap right now," Emily said, trying to steady her breath. "But I am asking you to believe in the possibility. Machines can help us, not control us. And if we don't take that first step, we'll never know what's possible." Rachel gave her a tight smile. "We'll see, Emily. We'll see." The meeting ended without any immediate commitments, but Emily knew the damage had been done. The investors weren't convinced. They weren't ready to take the risk. And as she walked out of the boardroom, she couldn't shake the feeling that the world wasn't just rejecting her ideas, they were actively trying to shut her down. But as the doors closed behind her, Emily didn't give up. She knew this was only the beginning. The journey would be long, and it would be fraught with obstacles. But if there was one thing she had learned over the past year, it was that the future belonged to those who refused to back down, no matter how tough the journey got. She had started this journey with a single idea, that machines could be more than just tools. And she was willing to risk everything to see that idea through to the end. Emily was ready for what came next. She was ready to fight, no matter what it took. But in the back of her mind, Emily couldn't help but wonder. If the world wouldn't accept her vision of the future, what lengths would she be willing to go to make them see it? And at what cost? The weeks following the meeting with the investors felt like an eternity. Emily had grown accustomed to the tension and the pushback, but this time was different. She could feel the weight of the rejection in her chest, pressing down on her. The world wasn't ready for her ideas, not yet. Or so it seemed. But Emily wasn't ready to give up. She had faced obstacles before, and she knew that the greatest breakthroughs often came from the hardest battles. It was time to shift tactics, to move from defense to offense. So, she did what she always did when things got tough, she doubled down on her work. In her small, cluttered room in her parents' house, Emily pored over data, built prototypes, and ran simulations late into the night. The cold, artificial glow of her laptop screen was her only company as she sifted through lines of code. She wasn't just trying to create a machine that could understand emotions. She was trying to create a machine that could feel emotions, and that, she knew, would be the key to changing everything. Then, one evening, as the clock neared midnight, she made a breakthrough. Emily had been working on a neural network that mimicked the way human brains processed emotions. It was a complex system, one that involved analyzing facial expressions, vocal tones, body language, and even subtle changes in the environment. Her goal was simple but ambitious, to create an AI that could interpret and respond to human emotions with empathy, not just logic. As she ran the final test, the system began to produce results far beyond her expectations. It wasn't just recognizing emotions, it was responding to them. When the AI detected sadness in a voice, it offered comforting words. When it sensed anger, it adjusted its tone to calm the user. Emily couldn't believe what she was seeing. For the first time, she felt a flicker of hope. The next day, she showed her breakthrough to a small group of trusted colleagues, people who had been supportive of her vision from the start. They, too, were stunned by the progress. They had seen her struggle, watched as she faced rejection after rejection, but now they were witnessing the potential of her work. "This is incredible," said one of them, his voice full of awe. "You've done it. You've created something no one thought was possible." But Emily's excitement was short-lived. As she glanced at the glowing screen, the doubts began to creep in again. The critics were still out there. Nathan Coleman, the investors, and the countless voices who had called her ideas naive, they were still watching. And what would they say when they saw this? Would they embrace it as the next step in AI, or would they dismiss it as a dangerous, misguided experiment? Then, just as her optimism started to wane, Emily's phone buzzed. It was an email from one of her key advisors, Robert Turner. His words were direct and cold. "Emily, I've been following your progress. And I have to be honest with you, you're treading dangerous ground. If you move forward with this emotional AI, you're going to face serious consequences. People will come after you. I suggest you reconsider." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. Robert had been one of her biggest supporters, someone who believed in her vision. But now he was telling her to stop. To walk away. For a moment, Emily considered his advice. She knew he was right. There were dangers, ethical concerns, security risks, and the possibility of AI being used to manipulate human emotions. But there was something deeper at play here. She wasn't just building a system, she was building a future. And she couldn't let fear stop her now. That night, she stayed up long after everyone else had gone to bed. She stared at the prototype she had created, the neural network that could understand and respond to emotions. For a moment, she thought about the long road ahead, the opposition she would face, the struggles, the sacrifices. But then, a thought crossed her mind: what if this was the key to something even bigger? For the first time in weeks, Emily felt a sense of clarity. She wasn't just building AI. She was building a bridge between humanity and technology, one that could heal the divisions between people, one that could bring understanding where there was none. She could create a world where machines weren't just tools, but partners. Allies. It was then that Emily made a decision. She wasn't going to stop. No matter the costs. She was going to take this idea to the world, to make them see the future she saw. The next morning, she reached out to her team. She needed a plan, and she needed it fast. The time had come to present her breakthrough to the world, and to the people who had rejected her before. Emily's vision wasn't just about creating a new kind of AI, it was about changing the entire narrative of what technology could be. And now, with her new creation, she had the proof. The world would have to listen. But as Emily prepared to unveil her creation, she couldn't shake the feeling that the greatest test was yet to come. Was she truly ready to face the backlash that would follow? And would her vision, her idea of a compassionate AI, be enough to change the minds of those who held the keys to the future. The morning after Emily made the decision to take her emotional AI to the world, the weight of what she was about to do hit her like a ton of bricks. She had no illusions about the challenges she was facing. In fact, she had grown accustomed to people questioning her work, dismissing her ideas, and ridiculing her age. But now, with her breakthrough in hand, she knew she was stepping into a whole new arena, one that could either catapult her into history or bury her beneath the weight of controversy. With the team behind her, Emily set up a press conference to reveal her creation. She didn't want to hold back, didn't want to shy away from the inevitable questions that would come. If she was going to change the world, she needed to face the music head-on. The day of the press conference arrived, and Emily stood backstage, her hands slightly trembling, but her mind as sharp as ever. She was in front of a sea of reporters, all armed with cameras and microphones, ready to either embrace her idea or tear it apart. Her parents, sitting in the front row, watched with a mix of pride and concern. Emily knew they were supportive, but they too understood the risks involved. "Ready?" one of her advisors asked. Emily took a deep breath and nodded. "Ready." The lights on the stage brightened as she walked out in front of the crowd. A buzz of whispers erupted. The world had heard of her before, but now they were about to see what she had truly been working on. She had already proven that she was a force to be reckoned with, but this was her chance to show them that her ideas weren't just groundbreaking, they were the future. She took her place at the podium, the sea of faces before her making her feel both small and powerful at the same time. She could hear the distant clicks of cameras and the murmurs of journalists. "Thank you for being here today," Emily began, her voice steady. "I'm here to share something that I believe can change the world, a new kind of artificial intelligence. Not just intelligent in the way you've come to expect, but one that understands, feels, and responds to human emotion." There was a quiet murmur among the crowd. Some faces lit up with interest, others with skepticism. She knew she had them on the edge of their seats. This wasn't just another AI presentation. This was different. "I've created a machine that can recognize not just the words we say, but how we say them. It can read our body language, understand our feelings, and respond with empathy. Imagine a world where machines not only help us work but also help us feel heard, seen, and understood." At first, it seemed like the audience was processing her words. But as soon as she finished speaking, the questions came flying. "Isn't this dangerous?" one reporter asked. "Emotions are subjective. How can you ensure that an AI's interpretation of emotions is accurate, or fair?" Emily took a deep breath and smiled. "That's a fair question. What we've built isn't perfect, but it's a start. We've trained it to learn from real human interactions, and it can adapt over time. The idea is to create a system that gets better as it learns, much like how we learn to understand one another through experience." Another reporter jumped in. "But what about privacy? You're asking these machines to read our emotions. That sounds like a breach of personal space. How can you guarantee that these machines won't be used to manipulate or control people?" Emily's heart raced. She had anticipated this question, but hearing it out loud made it feel all the more real. "I understand the concerns. It's why we've built strict ethical guidelines into our system. The AI will never make decisions on its own, it's meant to assist, not replace human judgment. The ultimate control lies with the people who use it. We can choose to embrace this technology or leave it behind, but we have to take responsibility for how we use it." The room grew tense. Emily had learned early on that the most groundbreaking ideas often came with the harshest scrutiny. She wasn't naive, she had known this wouldn't be an easy sell. But as the questions continued to pile on, each one pushing her deeper into a corner, she began to feel a familiar unease creeping in. Then, it happened. The question she had been dreading came from the back of the room. Nathan Coleman, the man who had been her biggest critic from the start, stood up. The crowd fell silent as he raised his hand. Emily didn't have to look at him to know who it was. She could feel the weight of his gaze on her from across the room. "You said it yourself, Emily," Nathan began, his voice cutting through the tension. "This AI doesn't replace human judgment. It's just a tool. But the problem with your idea isn't the technology itself, it's the potential for abuse. Machines that understand emotions, that react based on what they perceive, what happens when they misinterpret someone's feelings? What happens when someone uses this technology to manipulate others, to make them feel things they didn't feel before?" Emily swallowed hard. She had known Nathan would be the one to challenge her the hardest, but hearing it in person, seeing the way the crowd hung on his every word, made her heart sink. "I've worked in this industry for years," Nathan continued, "and I've seen firsthand how good intentions can go awry. You're opening up a Pandora's box, Emily. This could be dangerous." The words echoed in her mind, and for a moment, she couldn't speak. Everything she had worked for, everything she had dreamed of, felt like it was on the verge of falling apart. She had spent years developing this AI, pouring everything she had into it. But Nathan's words, his warning, rang true in ways she couldn't deny. But then, she remembered why she started all this in the first place. She wasn't trying to build a perfect system. She wasn't trying to erase all the flaws in humanity. She was simply trying to make the world better by creating something that could understand us, something that could help us communicate in ways we never had before. Taking a deep breath, Emily straightened up, her gaze steady on Nathan. "I understand your concerns, Nathan. And you're right, there are risks. But we can't let fear stop us from moving forward. We have to take that first step, even if it's not perfect. Because without it, we'll never know what's possible. I'm not asking for the world to embrace it all at once. I'm asking for a chance to make a difference." There was a long silence. The reporters were still, their eyes on Emily. She had said what needed to be said. The rest was up to the world. As the press conference ended, Emily walked off the stage, her heart pounding. She had made her case. She had done everything she could. Now, the road ahead would be even harder than before. But she had one thing the world didn't: conviction. And no matter how many roadblocks she faced, Emily knew she couldn't stop now. But as she left the stage, one question lingered in her mind. What would happen when the world tried to tear her vision apart? Would she have the strength to hold on to it? Or would it crumble under the weight of doubt? The aftermath of the press conference was a blur. Emily had expected some pushback, but the scale and intensity of the reaction were beyond anything she could have imagined. By the time she got back to her parents' house, the news was already flooded with opinions, and social media was ablaze. In the span of a few hours, Emily went from being hailed as a tech prodigy to being the target of a global debate. Headlines screamed accusations: "The dangers of emotional AI, is this the end of privacy? Will machines learn to manipulate us?" On Twitter, the hashtags #StopEmotionalAI and #AIOverload began to trend, and soon, thousands of posts flooded in, some supportive, many deeply critical. Emily sat in her room, staring at her phone as the notifications poured in. The messages ranged from angry rants to words of encouragement. But it was the comments from industry experts and influencers that stung the most. Many of them echoed Nathan's concerns: questions about privacy, the potential for emotional manipulation, and the ethical ramifications of creating machines that could understand our feelings. Emily had spent so long envisioning the positive potential of her AI that she hadn't fully anticipated the way the world might react. Yes, people were afraid of change, but there was something else simmering beneath the surface, a fear that this technology might change the very fabric of what it meant to be human. Her phone buzzed again. It was a notification from a news outlet. Emily clicked it without thinking, and her heart sank. Breaking: tech mogul Nathan Coleman calls for an international ban on emotional AI. "This technology is too dangerous to exist," says Coleman. Emily's stomach churned. She had known Nathan would be a problem, but she hadn't expected him to rally such a public campaign against her. He was powerful, influential. His voice could sway governments, businesses, and even entire industries. The implications were chilling. The next few days were a whirlwind of chaos. As the backlash grew, Emily found herself fighting off waves of doubt. Every news outlet seemed to have an expert weighing in with the same argument: this technology was too dangerous, too unpredictable. Worse, some began to suggest that Emily had no idea what she was getting into, that she was too young, too inexperienced to understand the consequences of what she was trying to create. But amidst all the criticism, there was something else, something unexpected. Her inbox began to fill with messages from people she'd never met. Ordinary people. Messages from teachers, therapists, doctors, and even parents. They were telling her how much they believed in her work, how they thought this AI could help people, could make a real difference in their lives. One message, in particular, stood out. "I'm a teacher, Emily. I've seen how difficult it is for kids with autism to understand and communicate their emotions. Your AI could change that. Don't let them stop you. Keep going. You're helping people like my students, and they need you." The words hit Emily like a bolt of lightning. She had always known that her work had the potential to help people, but hearing it from someone on the front lines, someone who understood the real-world implications, gave her a renewed sense of purpose. She wasn't just creating a piece of technology. She was creating a tool that could bridge gaps, that could provide support where human interaction fell short. But even with the overwhelming support from some quarters, the pressure was mounting. There were calls for investigations into her work, demands for regulations and oversight. People were afraid of what the future held, and Emily was right in the middle of it all. One evening, just after dinner, her phone rang. It was Robert Turner, the advisor who had once told her to be careful, the one who had warned her about the dangers of this path. "Emily, I've been following the news," Robert said, his voice calm but filled with concern. "I've seen what's happening, and I'm worried. I think it's time we re-evaluated this. You need to consider pulling back." Emily's pulse quickened. "I can't pull back, Robert. This is bigger than just me. People need this technology. They want it." "I know you believe that," Robert said, his voice gentle but firm. "But you're being reckless. Do you realize how close you are to having governments intervene? You're on the brink of losing everything you've worked for. Think about your reputation, your future." "I can't think about that right now," Emily replied, her voice tight. "I'm not backing down. I can't. This is my dream." "Your dream is important, Emily, but it can't come at the cost of everything else. Please, think about it." The call ended, and Emily sat in silence for a long time. She had been expecting something like this. Robert had always been practical, cautious, but hearing him speak with such concern left her shaken. She had a choice to make: back down, or keep pushing forward despite the fear, the criticism, and the uncertainty. Emily knew one thing: if she didn't fight for this now, she might never have another chance. The world needed to see the potential, the hope, the possibilities her technology could offer. She wasn't just going to be another cautionary tale in the tech world. She was going to prove that change, real change, could come from innovation, from pushing the boundaries of what was thought possible. But she couldn't do it alone. The world was watching, and she had to prepare for the fight ahead. It wasn't just about technology anymore, it was about shaping the future, standing up for what she believed in, and showing the world that her vision was worth pursuing. The next day, Emily reached out to her team. There would be no retreat. It was time to regroup, to strategize, and to take the fight to the next level. She would have to face the critics head-on, prove the worth of her work, and above all, stay true to the vision that had guided her from the beginning. But as she sat down to plan her next move, Emily couldn't help but wonder, was this truly the beginning of something great, or would the backlash be too much for her to overcome? The weight of the world seemed to bear down on Emily in ways she couldn't have predicted. As the backlash against her work intensified, it felt like every corner she turned revealed another obstacle, another battle to fight. But she wasn't ready to back down. Not yet. Not ever. Her team was behind her, and that was more than she could have asked for. Still, even as the media continued to churn out scathing reports, a small group of supporters began to emerge from the shadows. There were messages from tech innovators, academic researchers, and even everyday citizens who had seen the potential in Emily's work. They were all rallying behind her, urging her to continue. The news, however, was still grim. Emily had been invited to appear on a popular tech debate show to discuss the ethical concerns surrounding emotional AI. It wasn't going to be an easy conversation, but she knew she needed to take control of the narrative. She needed to speak directly to the public, to the critics, and to the world. It was time for the truth to come out, and Emily was prepared to stand her ground. The day of the debate arrived. Emily, dressed in a sharp but simple black blazer, sat in a small dressing room backstage, taking deep breaths to calm her nerves. The show was scheduled to air live, and the tension was palpable. As she stared at her reflection in the mirror, she found herself confronting the person she had become. Was she the same girl who had once just tinkered with technology in her bedroom, dreaming of making a difference? She wasn't sure. But what she did know was that she had already crossed a line, and there was no turning back now. Her phone buzzed. A message from her mom. "We're proud of you, sweetheart. You're doing something amazing." Tears welled up in Emily's eyes, but she blinked them away. Her mom's support had always been unwavering, and at that moment, it was exactly what she needed. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for a future where empathy could live inside technology, where understanding could be more than just a fleeting moment, it could be a foundation for the future. The studio was buzzing with energy when she entered. The debate panel was made up of three major figures in tech: Nathan Coleman, of course, who had been leading the charge against her work, a professor of ethics in AI named Dr. Marie Johansson, and Dr. Jared Kim, a researcher in machine learning who had expressed both support and caution regarding her emotional AI. The host, a sharp-witted journalist named Laura Adams, smiled at Emily as she took her seat. "Welcome, Emily," Laura said, her tone warm yet filled with curiosity. "Tonight's topic, as you all know, is a divisive one. Emily has developed an AI that can recognize and respond to human emotions in a way that's never been done before. But as we've seen in the past few days, it's also raised serious questions about privacy, manipulation, and the very essence of what it means to be human. So, let's dive right in." Nathan was the first to speak. "It's simple, Laura. We're talking about machines that can read our emotions. The potential for misuse is vast. Who controls this data? Who decides when and how this AI can intervene in our lives? We're opening a door we may never be able to close. If this technology is allowed to flourish, it could be used to manipulate individuals, corporations, or even governments. It's not just a dangerous idea, it's an existential risk." Emily sat quietly for a moment, her mind whirring. Nathan's words were harsh, but she had anticipated them. She took a breath and faced him directly. "Yes, Nathan, I understand the risks," Emily said, her voice calm but firm. "But with every great innovation, there's always an element of risk. Do you think we should have abandoned the internet because it could be used to manipulate people? Do you think we should have never built social media platforms because they could be misused? Every new technology comes with a responsibility to use it ethically. But that doesn't mean we should shut it down before we even give it a chance." Dr. Johansson, who had been silently observing, now leaned forward, her voice thoughtful but skeptical. "Emily, you make a compelling point about the risks of technology. But what you're asking us to embrace is a future where AI could, in some cases, know us better than we know ourselves. What happens when an AI misinterprets a person's emotional state? What happens when that misinterpretation leads to harm?" Emily nodded, feeling the weight of the question. "I understand that concern, Dr. Johansson. That's why we're not at the point of full implementation yet. My AI isn't designed to replace human judgment, but to support it. It's a tool. But like any tool, it requires careful handling. We have strict protocols in place to ensure it doesn't act on its own without human oversight. We want it to be an aid in understanding, not a replacement for human empathy. Dr. Kim, who had remained mostly quiet up until this point, spoke up. I think what Emily is trying to say is that we're on the cusp of something new. This technology, while not perfect, could offer immense benefits. I've worked on AI systems that assist in healthcare, helping doctors understand patient needs more clearly. Emotional AI, if done right, could do something similar. Imagine an AI that helps therapists understand their patients better or helps teachers connect with students who struggle with emotional regulation. Emily's heart leapt at the support. Dr. Kim was one of the foremost minds in the field, and his endorsement carried weight. The discussion continued for another hour, with intense debates and pointed questions from both sides. But as the debate came to an end, Emily felt something shift. The audience had been captivated. They were no longer just hearing the criticisms, they were hearing the possibilities. As the cameras turned off, Laura Adams turned to Emily. I have to ask, though, Emily, what's next for you? How do you plan to deal with the continued backlash? Emily took a deep breath. What's next is simple. I'm going to keep going. I'm not doing this just for tech enthusiasts. I'm doing it for everyone who needs a better way to communicate, to be understood, and to feel seen. This isn't just about creating a new form of AI, it's about creating a future where technology can enhance our humanity. It's going to be hard, and it's going to take time. But I believe it's worth the effort. The debate was over, but Emily's fight was just beginning. As she walked off the stage, the applause ringing in her ears, she knew this was a turning point. She had faced her critics, stood firm in her beliefs, and shown the world that she wasn't going anywhere. But the road ahead was still fraught with challenges. And she was ready for them. The days after the debate felt like a whirlwind. The live discussion had sparked a wave of reactions, and while some of the public had started to shift in Emily's favor, the backlash from powerful figures like Nathan Coleman and other critics hadn't died down. The media storm continued, but Emily felt more certain than ever that she was on the right path. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot, but for the first time, it felt like she wasn't fighting alone. Her phone rang one afternoon, interrupting the silence that had settled over her office. It was Robert Turner, the mentor who had warned her about the risks. She hadn't spoken to him since their last conversation, when he told her to pull back, to reconsider her course of action. Emily, Robert's voice came through with an edge of urgency, I've been watching the developments. I need to speak with you. Can we meet? Emily frowned. What's going on, Robert? I think we need to talk about the next steps, he said, his voice lower than usual. Meet me tomorrow at the usual place. It was clear that Robert wasn't calling to offer more criticism, something had changed. She agreed, though she couldn't shake the feeling that whatever he wanted to discuss, it was important. The next day, Emily met Robert at a small, quiet cafe not far from her office. He was already sitting at a table in the corner when she arrived, looking more serious than she'd ever seen him. Robert had always been the cautious voice in her corner, but this time, his expression seemed different, tighter, more focused. I've been thinking a lot about everything, Emily, Robert said, his voice hesitant. The backlash, the debate, the way people are reacting, and I've come to a conclusion. You're right. You're doing something groundbreaking, and you shouldn't stop. But it's not just the critics you have to worry about now. Emily leaned in, curiosity piqued. What do you mean? There's something you haven't considered, Robert said, lowering his voice further. It's not just Nathan Coleman you need to watch out for anymore. I've been hearing whispers, talk about certain groups who might not be so happy with your AI. Groups? Emily repeated, her mind racing. What are you talking about? Let's just say there are some powerful forces, companies, investors, even some government figures, who see what you're doing as a threat. Not just to the tech industry, but to the control they have over people's lives. And they're starting to mobilize. Robert looked over his shoulder as if ensuring no one was listening, then continued, I don't know how far this goes yet, but it's getting serious. Emily's heart skipped a beat. She had always expected pushback from the tech elite, but now it sounded like there were deeper, darker forces involved. Forces that had a lot more at stake than just the future of emotional AI. Are you saying they're trying to shut me down? Emily asked, her voice barely a whisper. I think it's more than that, Robert said grimly. They're trying to control the narrative. If they can paint you as reckless, as a threat to society, they can get the public on their side. And when that happens, it won't just be about stopping your project. It will be about stopping anyone who dares to challenge the status quo. They'll use whatever means necessary. Emily felt the weight of his words settle in her chest like a heavy stone. She had known this journey would be difficult, but she hadn't expected it to be this dangerous. She had always believed that innovation would lead to a better future, but now it seemed that not everyone shared her vision. So, what do we do? Emily asked, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of thoughts racing through her mind. Robert took a deep breath, then leaned across the table. I've been talking to some people who might be able to help. There are individuals who believe in your work, who understand the stakes, and who are willing to back you up. It won't be easy, but you don't have to face this alone. Emily's mind was spinning. The idea of seeking allies in this fight felt like both a lifeline and a risk. She didn't know who Robert was referring to, but it seemed that if she was going to move forward, she would have to trust him. I'm in, Emily said, her voice resolute. If this is as big as you say, I'm not backing down now. I've come too far. Robert nodded slowly. Good. But we need to be careful. This isn't just about building technology anymore. This is about protecting it, ensuring it can be used for good. And that means we'll need to fight not just with our ideas, but with strategy and power. Emily knew he was right. As much as she had dreamed of changing the world with her AI, the reality of doing so was far more complicated. The stakes were higher now, and the people who controlled the narrative controlled the future. But she wasn't about to let that intimidate her. If anything, it only fueled her determination to see this through. Who are these people you're talking about? Emily asked, her curiosity growing. I'll introduce you soon, Robert replied. But we need to move carefully. The forces we're up against aren't just going to sit by and let us play in their sandbox. We need to be prepared. The conversation ended with more questions than answers, but Emily felt something stirring deep inside her, an unshakable resolve. She wasn't just up against the critics anymore. She was up against a system that didn't want to change, that saw her as a threat to the established order. But Emily wasn't someone who backed down. She had a purpose, a vision, and a team of supporters who believed in her. She wasn't about to let anyone take that away from her. The next few days were filled with uncertainty, but also a renewed sense of focus. Emily worked late into the night, refining her AI, preparing for what was coming. She knew that she had to be ready for the next phase of this journey, the part where she would no longer just be a creator. She would have to become a fighter. The battle for the future of emotional AI was just beginning. It had been a week since Emily had met Robert at the cafe, and already, the pressure seemed to double. The unsettling words he'd spoken about powerful groups trying to control the narrative weighed heavily on her. Every move she made felt scrutinized. Every email, every conversation, every line of code she wrote seemed like it could be used against her. She felt the walls closing in, but she also felt an unshakable resolve to push forward. Despite Robert's warning, Emily had been hard at work refining the emotional AI, making sure that it was as ethical and transparent as possible. She had thought of every scenario, tested every safeguard, and yet, the shadows of the unknown loomed larger than ever. Who were these people who might try to shut her down? What did they want? Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a message from Sarah, her best friend, and the person who had always been her emotional anchor. Emily, are you okay? I'm worried about you. Call me when you can. Emily's fingers hovered over the screen. She hadn't told Sarah about the growing threats. She didn't want to worry her, but the weight of everything was becoming unbearable. She called her. Hey, what's going on? You've been distant lately, Sarah's voice crackled through the line. Emily hesitated for a moment, unsure of how much to reveal. It's a lot, Sarah. There are some people who aren't happy with what I'm doing, and it's starting to get intense. But I'm handling it. I knew it. Sarah exclaimed. I knew this would happen. You can't change the world without making some enemies. But listen, you've got to take care of yourself too. You can't do this alone. I'm not alone, Emily replied quickly, feeling a swell of gratitude for her friend's concern. I've got Robert. And I've got a team. We're in this together. Sarah paused, sensing that there was more beneath the surface. I get it. But remember, I'm here for you. Always. Emily smiled, feeling the warmth of Sarah's words wash over her. It felt good to hear a voice that wasn't caught up in the chaos of the tech world. For a moment, she felt like everything could go back to normal. But she knew it wouldn't. Not anymore. After the call, Emily went back to work, trying to focus. She had spent hours poring over her AI's programming, making sure it was flawless. It had to be, there was no room for error now. Every mistake, every bug could give her enemies the ammunition they needed to destroy her work. It was late in the evening when she received another message. This time, it wasn't from Sarah, but from someone unexpected, Dr. Jared Kim, the researcher who had publicly supported her in the debate. The message was short, but its implications were anything but. Emily, meet me at the lab tomorrow morning. I have something important to discuss. Her heart skipped a beat. What could this be about? She hadn't heard from Dr. Kim since the debate, and his message carried a sense of urgency. Was he offering her support again, or was this about something else entirely? The next morning, Emily arrived at the lab early. Dr. Kim was already there, waiting for her by a large workstation cluttered with research papers and monitors. He looked more serious than usual, his expression almost grim. Dr. Kim, what's going on? Emily asked, anxiety creeping into her voice. Dr. Kim motioned for her to sit. It's about the threats, Emily. They're not just whispers anymore. There's something bigger at play here, something that could undermine everything you've worked for. Emily's stomach tightened. What do you mean? I've been doing some digging, Dr. Kim said, lowering his voice. There's a tech conglomerate, one of the biggest players in the industry, that's been quietly working to develop a similar emotional AI system. They've had a lot of funding and resources backing them. But what they don't have is the ethical foundation you've built. Emily felt a cold shiver run down her spine. So, they're trying to steal my work. Dr. Kim nodded. Not just steal it. They've already started discrediting you. They're planting stories in the media, trying to paint you as reckless. And it's working. The more they can turn the public against you, the more control they'll have. They want to dominate this space, and if they can destroy you before you reach the next stage, they'll have a monopoly on emotional AI. Emily's mind was reeling. The reality of the situation was sinking in. It wasn't just about critics like Nathan Coleman anymore. There were massive, powerful entities pulling strings behind the scenes, trying to tear everything she had built apart. So, what do we do? Emily asked, trying to steady her breath. How do we fight back? We need to play their game, Dr. Kim said. We need to be smarter than they are. I've been working on a few ideas, ways we can counter their narrative. But we need to be careful. If they get wind of what we're doing, they'll stop at nothing to silence us. Emily leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. She was no longer just fighting for innovation, she was fighting for her very existence in the tech world. But this was the moment she had been preparing for. This was where everything she had worked for would either crumble or rise. "I'm ready," she said, determination seeping into her voice. "I won't let them win." Dr. Kim smiled, a hint of respect in his eyes. "I knew you'd say that. Alright, here's what we're going to do." He outlined a plan to gather more supporters, both from within the tech world and from outside it. They would use the power of social media to spread the truth about her work, expose the conglomerate's underhanded tactics and rally people who believed in the potential of emotional AI. They would have to move quickly, and they would have to be strategic. This wouldn't be an easy fight, but Emily knew that this was her chance to prove not just the worth of her technology, but the value of ethics in a world driven by profit. The battle lines had been drawn. But Emily was no longer afraid of the fight. She had the knowledge, the vision, and now, she had the support. It was time to show the world just how powerful innovation could be when it was guided by the right intentions. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The days that followed were a blur of activity. Emily's world had shifted entirely, and now, every move she made was a calculated step in a game that felt like it was quickly spiraling into chaos. Robert's warning, Dr. Kim's intel, and the ever-growing weight of the task ahead, it all felt like too much at times. But every time she thought about backing down, she remembered the bigger picture. She couldn't let fear stop her now. She had to win this. The team she was assembling grew every day, and with each new ally, Emily felt a surge of hope. They were a diverse group, researchers, ethicists, tech specialists, and even a few journalists who were determined to bring the truth to light. It was a quiet rebellion, the kind that could change the world, but only if they were smart and tactical. They worked in secret, meeting in hidden locations, communicating only through encrypted channels. Dr. Kim had connections to influential people, and Robert had his own network of experts who were quietly lending their support. Even Sarah, though still unaware of the full scope of what Emily was facing, had offered her help by spreading the word on social media, urging her followers to get behind Emily's cause. But it wasn't enough just to build a network of supporters. They needed evidence. Evidence that the tech conglomerate was playing dirty, manipulating the narrative, and pushing their own version of emotional AI at any cost. Emily's team scoured every piece of information they could find, searching for anything that could turn the tide in their favor. One evening, as the team gathered at their covert meeting spot, Dr. Kim handed Emily a file. "What's this?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. "It's the smoking gun," Dr. Kim said, his eyes glinting with excitement. "I think we've finally got the proof we need." Emily flipped through the file. It was a series of leaked emails, internal communications from the tech conglomerate. They were discussing tactics to discredit Emily, to manipulate public perception of her work. The emails were damning. One message in particular stood out, from a senior executive to a public relations manager. "The best way to neutralize her is to attack her credibility. She's a young, untested creator with no experience. We need to plant stories that question her intentions. If we can make the public believe she's a threat to society, it'll be much easier to control the narrative." Emily's heart pounded as she read. This was it, the evidence they needed to show the world that the conglomerate wasn't just fighting for innovation, they were willing to destroy lives to protect their monopoly. "This is huge," Emily said, her voice steady despite the rush of adrenaline coursing through her. "We've got them. But we need to act fast," Dr. Kim cautioned. "The longer we wait, the more time they'll have to cover their tracks. We need to get this into the right hands, quickly." "Let's go public," Emily said, her eyes gleaming with determination. "We release this. We make it known that we're not the problem here. They are." Robert, who had been silently observing the exchange, nodded approvingly. "You're right. It's time to turn the tables." The next few days were a blur of media strategies, legal consultations, and planning. Emily knew the risks. Once they went public with the emails, there would be no turning back. The conglomerate would retaliate, and they would retaliate hard. But Emily wasn't scared anymore. She had the truth on her side, and that truth was more powerful than any smear campaign they could launch. Then came the day of the press conference. Emily stood backstage, heart racing, as the world's media gathered in the auditorium, eager to hear what she had to say. She had carefully crafted her message. She wasn't just going to reveal the emails, she was going to tell the world why she had built her AI in the first place, what it meant for society, and why she wasn't going to back down. When it was time, she walked to the podium with a confidence she hadn't known she had. The room fell silent, the eyes of the world on her. She looked at the sea of faces, the camera lenses trained on her, and she took a deep breath. "I've come here today because I believe in something," Emily began, her voice steady but filled with passion. "I believe in the power of innovation. I believe in the potential of emotional AI to change the world for the better. But more importantly, I believe in the truth." She paused, making eye contact with several reporters in the front row, allowing her words to sink in. Some powerful entities don't want that change. They don't want a future where technology serves humanity, where we make decisions based on empathy, not profits. And so, they've gone to great lengths to discredit me, to attack my work. But today, I'm not just standing here to defend myself. I'm standing here to defend the future we deserve. The crowd was silent, waiting for her next move. Emily knew she had their attention. Now, it was time to hit them with the truth. "Today, I'm releasing the evidence that proves just how far these powerful corporations will go to maintain control," she continued. "I have emails. Internal communications from executives at one of the largest tech conglomerates in the world. In these emails, they discuss how they plan to destroy my reputation, how they plan to manipulate the media, and how they'll stop at nothing to keep their monopoly on emotional AI." The gasps in the room were audible. Emily knew she had just launched the first real strike in what would undoubtedly be a long and grueling battle. "As of this moment," Emily said, her voice rising, "I am calling on every one of you to join me. This isn't just about me. This is about the future of technology. This is about creating a world where innovation serves the people, not just the corporations that want to control it. I won't back down. I won't let them win. And I won't let them silence us." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle in. Then, with a final, resolute statement, she concluded. "Together, we can turn the tide. And we will." The room erupted into a frenzy. Reporters rushed to ask questions, cameras flashed, and Emily felt a surge of adrenaline as she realized the battle had only just begun. But for the first time in weeks, she felt like she was finally in control. She had exposed the truth. And now, the world would know. The next few days were a whirlwind of media coverage, social media storms, and a barrage of phone calls. Emily's decision to go public with the emails had set off a chain reaction that she hadn't fully anticipated. The tech conglomerate, though powerful and rich, was now on the defensive. The emails she had exposed were everywhere, on news outlets, blogs, and social media platforms. It wasn't just tech enthusiasts who were outraged, the public was waking up to the darker side of the tech industry. Emily had spent the last few days responding to interview requests, drafting statements, and working with her legal team to prepare for the inevitable backlash. She had hoped that revealing the truth would be the catalyst for change, but what she hadn't expected was the raw emotional toll it would take on her. Everywhere she went, people recognized her. Some offered their support, others cast judgment. The weight of public opinion, both positive and negative, was overwhelming. She was both the hero and the villain in a story that was evolving by the hour. But there was one moment that changed everything. It was late at night, and Emily was in her office, staring at the countless messages flooding her inbox. She hadn't slept in days, her mind constantly racing with the next step, the next move. But as she scrolled through the messages, one email caught her attention. It was from Robert. She had seen him less frequently after the press conference, and she had begun to worry about him. They had been working together for weeks, but Robert was always careful to remain a bit distant. There was something about his quiet demeanor that felt like he was holding back, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. The subject line of the email was simple: "We need to talk." Emily's stomach clenched. She had learned to trust Robert, but after everything that had happened in the past few days, she wasn't sure what he was about to say. She opened the email. "Emily, I think it's time I tell you the truth. There's something you need to know. Meet me at the usual place tomorrow. We'll talk then." She stared at the screen, heart pounding. The words echoed in her mind: "There's something you need to know." What could he possibly mean? Was there more to this than she understood? The next day, she found herself waiting at their usual cafe, her fingers nervously tapping the table. The place was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt ominous now. Every time the door opened, she looked up, half expecting Robert to walk through. But he didn't. Not yet. Minutes passed, and then the door opened again. This time, it wasn't Robert. It was someone she didn't recognize, a man in a suit, with a serious expression on his face. He looked around briefly, his eyes scanning the room, before he made his way toward Emily's table. Her heart skipped a beat. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice betraying a hint of suspicion. The man smiled, though it wasn't a friendly smile. "I think we need to talk, Miss Chandler." Emily's stomach churned. She stood up, ready to bolt, but the man was quick to reach into his pocket and pull out an envelope. He placed it gently on the table in front of her. "This is for you," he said quietly. "Take it. You'll want to read it." Before she could respond, the man turned and left, disappearing as quickly as he had arrived. Emily's hands were shaking as she picked up the envelope. She tore it open, and inside was a single letter, written in a typeface that was stark and impersonal. It was short, to the point, and it made her blood run cold. "Emily Chandler. You have no idea who you're dealing with. The people behind the conglomerate are not to be trifled with. If you value your life, you will stop your efforts immediately. If you do not, we will make sure your name is erased from history. The choice is yours. A friend." Her hands trembled, and for a moment, she couldn't breathe. This was no longer just about technology. This was about survival. The stakes had just been raised in a way that she had never imagined. She stared at the letter, trying to comprehend what had just happened. Someone knew exactly how to push her buttons, and now, it wasn't just the future of emotional AI on the line, it was her own life. "Emily." Robert's voice called out from behind her, and she spun around, startled. He stood there, his face pale, eyes wide with concern. "Robert," she exclaimed, her voice strained. I just got this. Who are these people?" Robert looked down at the letter, his expression hardening. "They're not just some faceless tech conglomerate. They're connected to far more dangerous forces than you could ever imagine. I should have told you earlier, but I didn't want to scare you." "What do you mean? What's going on?" Emily demanded, her voice growing louder. Robert took a deep breath and sat down across from her, his face shadowed with regret. "I've been trying to protect you, Emily. I've been working with them from the inside." For a moment, the words didn't register. "What do you mean you've been working with them?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was recruited," Robert admitted, his eyes filled with shame. "At first, I thought I was helping you. But as time went on, I realized how far their influence stretched, how deep they were willing to go to control everything. I didn't want to be a part of it, but I got trapped. And now, I don't know how to get out." Emily's heart sank. The person she had trusted most, the one person who had always been there, offering guidance, support, and encouragement, had been part of the very system she was fighting against. "You," Emily began, but the words caught in her throat. "You've been working against me this whole time?" Robert's face twisted in pain. No. I never wanted to hurt you. I was trying to protect you, but I see now that I've only made things worse. I should have told you everything. But I didn't know how. And now, it's too late. They've found out what you're doing. They'll stop at nothing to destroy you. Emily stared at him, her mind reeling. The weight of betrayal hit her harder than anything she had ever felt before. The person she had leaned on the most had been lying to her, and now her life was in danger because of it. I can't believe this, she whispered, her voice breaking. I'm sorry, Emily, Robert said, his voice full of anguish. But there's still time. We can make this right. We can fight back. But we have to do it together. Emily's eyes flickered between the letter and Robert's desperate expression. In that moment, she realized something: she had to make a choice. She could allow the betrayal to consume her, or she could rise above it and continue the fight. The road ahead was uncertain, the risks higher than ever. But Emily had come too far to turn back now. She clenched her fists, wiped away a tear, and looked Robert square in the eyes. You've got one shot, Robert, she said, her voice steady, and you're going to help me take them down. The revelation of Robert's betrayal weighed heavily on Emily's heart. She spent the following days torn between trust and doubt, wondering if she could really rely on him again. The email had shaken her, but she couldn't afford to let it paralyze her. There were too many lives at stake, not just her own, but the millions of people who stood to benefit from the future of emotional AI. Despite the fear that gripped her, Emily was no stranger to conflict. She had faced challenges before, and she wasn't about to back down now. Her path forward had to be deliberate and precise, as there was no turning back. As the days passed, Emily continued to strategize, but now the stakes felt higher, the dangers more immediate. The support she had gathered for her cause was substantial, but the dark undercurrent of opposition was growing stronger. Behind the scenes, the tech conglomerate had gone into overdrive, countering her every move with tactics that ranged from corporate sabotage to media manipulation. The smear campaigns against her were relentless. Some journalists and influencers had begun painting her as a naive, reckless child who didn't understand the consequences of her actions. Others speculated that she was just another pawn in a larger game, too inexperienced to grasp the full scope of the battle. Robert had attempted to explain his past choices, telling Emily that he had been forced to work with the conglomerate, but his words felt hollow. The damage had been done. The moment Emily had needed him most, he had been playing both sides, trying to gain their trust in the hopes of eventually bringing them down from the inside. He had done what he thought was right, but the consequences were undeniable. His allegiance to her was now shattered in the eyes of the public, and worse, she had seen firsthand how easily a single moment of deception could unravel everything they had worked for. You can't undo the past, Emily said, staring at Robert across the table in the dimly lit cafe. But you can choose what you do now. Are you with me, or are you still with them? Robert's eyes filled with regret, but there was a new sense of resolve there too. I'm with you. I swear it. And I'll do everything I can to fix what I've broken. The decision had been made. It was time to push forward. They needed to hit the conglomerate hard, in a way that no one could ignore. The emails Emily had exposed were just the tip of the iceberg, and they had to make sure their evidence reached the masses, not just a handful of journalists. But that wasn't enough. Emily knew she had to do something drastic, something that would make the whole world take notice. We're going to the people, Emily said, her voice fierce with purpose. We need a direct message, something they can't spin or silence. Robert nodded, his face somber but determined. I know what you're thinking, but you need to be careful. The moment you step into that territory, there's no going back. You'll have every force against you. I've already seen what it's like to be attacked, Emily replied, her eyes steely. Let them come. I'm not afraid anymore. The plan was simple, yet bold. Emily would take the evidence directly to the people in a live broadcast. She would stream herself across all major platforms, addressing the world directly, and reveal the full extent of the conspiracy. It was a gamble, one that could either cement her as a hero or be the final nail in her coffin. But she had made up her mind. She wasn't going to let anyone control the narrative any longer. If the conglomerate wanted a war, they were going to get one. The day of the broadcast arrived, and Emily stood backstage, feeling an unexpected calm wash over her. She was no longer the girl trying to figure out how to survive in a world of corporate giants. She wasn't just a child prodigy, thrust into a battle she hadn't asked for. She was a force in her own right. And this time, she would control the story. Behind her, Robert and the rest of the team were running final checks. The network was set up, the encrypted feed secured, and the channels locked. Emily was about to speak to millions. But even with all the preparation, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking in the shadows. The conglomerate wouldn't let her go so easily. There would be no happy ending unless she fought for it. As the countdown began, Emily looked at herself in the mirror, trying to steady her nerves. She had faced down fear before, she could do it again. Her mind raced through the lines she'd rehearsed, the arguments she was going to make, the key points she needed to hit. There was no room for error. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The lights in the studio flickered, and Emily stepped forward, the world's eyes turning to her. The live broadcast clicked on, and her face appeared on every screen, from laptops to phones to giant outdoor billboards. The world was watching. Her voice broke the silence. "Hello, world," she began. "My name is Emily Chandler, and for the past year, I've been working to create a new kind of artificial intelligence, an emotional AI that could revolutionize how we interact with technology. But in my pursuit to change the future, I've learned something far more important. I've learned that the biggest threat to our future isn't innovation. It's control." She paused, letting her words sink in. Her eyes remained steady, never faltering, as she continued. "We live in a world where a few powerful corporations hold all the cards, and they don't want you to know the truth. They want you to believe that the future is theirs to control. But I'm here to tell you that we can take it back." The words flowed now, gaining strength as she spoke. She revealed the emails, the conspiracy, the truth about what the conglomerate was doing behind the scenes. She didn't just expose their manipulation of the media, their destruction of lives. They were trying to control the very future of technology, to silence anyone who stood in their way. "I could have stayed quiet," she said. "I could have let them win. But I refuse to live in a world where truth is a commodity to be bought and sold. This is about more than just me. It's about all of us. It's about creating a world where innovation serves humanity, not the other way around." She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her words settle over her. "You have a choice," she said softly, almost as though she were speaking directly to the millions watching. "We all do. And together, we can choose a future that's built on honesty, compassion, and freedom. A future where no one, no corporation, can hold the world hostage." With those final words, Emily clicked off the broadcast, and the world was left in stunned silence. The storm had been unleashed. The aftermath of Emily's broadcast was immediate, like a tidal wave crashing down on everything in its path. The world was divided, and the response was far more intense than she had expected. Some celebrated her bravery, seeing her as a champion of truth, a David against a corporate Goliath. Others saw her as a reckless child, too naive to understand the power she was challenging. The conglomerate was enraged, and their retaliation was swift. Within hours, media outlets, both major and minor, began to churn out articles that cast doubt on Emily's claims. They painted her as a naive genius who had been manipulated by shadowy figures in the tech industry. They focused on her age, her inexperience, and the fact that she had gone against one of the most powerful companies in the world. The smear campaign was relentless, flooding social media with hashtags like #EmilyExposed and #TechProdigyFail. The more the conglomerate tried to discredit her, the more the public turned on them. It became clear that Emily wasn't just a whistleblower, she had become the face of resistance, the symbol of standing up against unchecked corporate power. But with that newfound power came a cost. The attacks were becoming more personal. The messages, the threats, and the calls began pouring in. Anonymous emails, phone calls at all hours of the day, and even more sinister gestures. Someone had left a threatening note on her front door. The message was chilling: stop or else. But Emily didn't falter. If anything, the pressure only steeled her resolve. The first time she felt a glimmer of doubt was when she received a message from her mother. "Emily, I've seen the news. Are you sure you know what you're doing? These people don't play fair. They have resources beyond anything you've ever faced. Please, don't let this destroy you." Her mother's words were filled with love and concern, but they also echoed the fear that had been building in Emily's own heart. As much as she wanted to reassure her mother, Emily knew the truth: she was in over her head. The people she was fighting against weren't just tech moguls. They were power brokers, well-connected, ruthless, and determined to crush anyone who got in their way. And Emily had become their target. "Where's the media?" Robert asked one evening as they watched the growing chaos unfold on their screens. "I thought your message would be bigger than this." Emily stared at the screen. She could feel the tension building. The broadcast had gone viral, but not in the way she had expected. It wasn't just support flooding in, it was a constant barrage of criticism and threats. The conglomerate had hired damage control specialists, experts who knew how to manipulate the media and redirect public attention. They were good at what they did. "They're already twisting everything I said," Emily replied, her voice taut with frustration. "They're framing me as a danger, a threat to national security. They're not even trying to pretend they're unbiased anymore." Robert's face darkened. "That's what they do. They'll make sure the public sees you as a villain, no matter what." "We have to fight back," Emily said, a sense of urgency creeping into her voice. "I can't let them control the narrative." She was beginning to realize the true scope of the battle she was in. It wasn't just a matter of technology anymore. This was about power: who controlled the future, who had the resources to shape the world, and who was willing to sacrifice everything for the right to do so. And now, it was clear, the conglomerate wouldn't go down without a fight. The pressure mounted in ways Emily hadn't anticipated. She started getting strange calls, her phone rang with numbers she didn't recognize, and when she picked up, there was only silence on the other end. It felt like she was being watched, like the walls were closing in. The worst part was the loneliness that crept in. Her friends and allies were scattered, some staying quiet, others facing their own battles. Even Robert, her closest ally, seemed distant at times, as though weighed down by the same fears that gripped her. Despite it all, Emily kept moving forward. She knew she couldn't afford to stop now. There was no going back, not after what she had exposed. She had set something in motion, and now the only option was to see it through, no matter the cost. "Emily, you're burning the candle at both ends," Robert said one evening as they sat together in her apartment, reviewing documents and preparing for the next phase of their plan. He was speaking softly, his tone almost pleading. "You need to rest. You're not going to be able to keep this up forever." "I can't stop now, Robert," she replied, her voice tight. "The whole world is watching. If I rest now, if I give up, they win. And I can't let that happen." Robert exhaled, rubbing his temples. He understood the pressure, but he also saw the toll it was taking on her. Emily had always been determined, driven by an unyielding desire to create something better, something that would change the world. But this battle was different. It was more than just technology now, it was survival. "I get it," Robert said quietly. "But you can't do this alone." Emily glanced at him, the weight of his words sinking in. She knew he was right. She had been pushing herself too hard, trying to carry the entire burden of the movement on her shoulders. She was trying to do everything: fight the conglomerate, protect her reputation, and keep everyone safe. But the truth was, she couldn't do it alone. As if on cue, her phone buzzed on the table. She picked it up, her heart sinking as she read the message. It was from an unknown number, and the message was chilling. You have 48 hours to retract your statement. If you don't, you'll regret it. Her hand trembled as she put the phone down. It was clear now, the threat was real. The conglomerate wasn't going to let her continue this fight without consequences. They were willing to go to any lengths to stop her. She turned to Robert, her eyes filled with determination. We're not backing down. Not now, not ever. The stage was set for the final push. Emily and Robert knew that in order to truly take down the conglomerate, they would have to expose everything, every secret, every lie, every corrupt deal they had made. But the risks were higher than ever. The stakes weren't just her career anymore, they were her life. As the clock ticked down, Emily steeled herself for the battle ahead. The time for hesitation was over. It was time to push back, with everything they had. The hours following the threat were some of the most intense Emily had ever experienced. With the countdown clock ticking and the pressure mounting, the whole world seemed to be closing in on her. The weight of responsibility felt heavier than ever before. Not only was her life at stake, but the future of emotional AI, and potentially the future of technology itself, hung in the balance. Robert stayed by her side, offering quiet support. His usual calm demeanor was now tinged with concern. They had both come to understand that the conglomerate was not just fighting for control, they were fighting to eliminate anyone who stood in their way. And Emily, despite her age, her brilliance, and her courage, had become their primary target. The next step was clear, but it was one that filled Emily with dread. They had to infiltrate the conglomerate's most secure systems, those that had been hidden away from public view. Only then could they expose the full scope of the manipulation and control the conglomerate wielded. It was the one piece of evidence that could destroy them. But getting to that information wouldn't be easy. It meant risking everything. Emily knew that the network of security they would be up against was nearly impenetrable. If they failed, the consequences wouldn't just be legal or reputational, they could be deadly. They gathered their small team, people they could trust. The plan was simple on the surface: infiltrate the system, extract the evidence, and get out before anyone knew they were there. But nothing was ever as simple as it seemed. As Emily sat in front of the terminal, her fingers hovering over the keyboard, a sense of unease crept up her spine. The silence in the room was deafening. The weight of the moment settled heavily on her. This was it. The final push. Are you sure about this? Robert asked, breaking the tension. He stood behind her, his arms folded across his chest, watching her with a mix of awe and concern. Emily glanced up at him, her eyes steady. I'm sure. We're not just doing this for us. We're doing this for everyone. She took a deep breath and began typing, each keystroke carefully placed as she bypassed the layers of encryption and firewalls that had been set up by the conglomerate's best cybersecurity experts. The system was a labyrinth, but Emily had built her entire career on solving complex puzzles. This was no different, only the stakes were higher. Got it, she muttered under her breath. The screen in front of her lit up with the data she had been seeking. It was everything: the conglomerate's internal communications, their dark deals with other corporations, the puppet strings they had pulled in the political sphere, and worst of all, the people they had harmed along the way. It was all there, ready to be exposed to the world. But just as she began to download the files, something changed. A warning flashed on the screen. Intrusion detected. Emily's heart stopped. Get out of here. Robert shouted, his voice laced with panic. They've found us. The security system wasn't just passive, it was actively monitoring for intrusions. They'd been detected, and now they had no time left. Emily's fingers flew across the keyboard, trying to erase any trace of their presence, but the system was too fast, too clever. The countdown timer was already ticking down, and with each passing second, they grew closer to being trapped. We need to move, now. Robert urged, his hand grabbing her arm and pulling her away from the terminal. Wait, I can almost, Emily started, but before she could finish her sentence, the door to the room slammed open. Armed guards poured in, their eyes scanning the room with sharp focus. Get down! Robert shouted, shoving Emily to the ground just as the guards raised their weapons. A sharp burst of gunfire rang out, and everything went black for a moment. When Emily regained consciousness, she found herself lying on the cold floor of the building's lower level. Her head throbbed, and there was a strange metallic taste in her mouth. She tried to move, but her body felt stiff and sore. Emily, a voice whispered, and she blinked, struggling to clear the fog in her mind. It was Robert. His face was bloodied, but his eyes were wide with urgency. We need to get out of here. Now. Emily groaned and pushed herself up, her heart racing. They had been caught. The plan had failed, and they were on the run. She could feel the weight of the data they had tried to steal pressing down on her, everything they had worked for was now hanging in the balance. Robert helped her to her feet, and they scrambled through the dark corridors of the building, the sounds of footsteps echoing behind them. They had to move quickly, but Emily's mind raced in multiple directions. The files, if they could just get the data, they could still expose the conglomerate. But they had no more time to think strategically. It was all about survival now. Robert, do you have the data? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I grabbed what I could before they came in, he replied, his hand clutching a small, encrypted drive. But it's not enough. We need to get out of here, or we're done. They turned a corner and found themselves face to face with another group of guards. They had nowhere to go. This is it, Emily thought, her pulse pounding in her ears. But then, a strange sense of calm washed over her. She wasn't going to die here, not like this, not without a fight. Follow me, she said, her voice steady as she pulled Robert toward a maintenance elevator she spotted nearby. The door was slightly ajar. With one last glance over their shoulders, they slipped inside the elevator, and the doors closed behind them. They were free, for now. The elevator began its descent, and Emily's mind raced. They had narrowly escaped, but the battle was far from over. If anything, it was only just beginning. As the elevator hummed its way down to the underground parking lot, Emily's thoughts turned to the road ahead. The conglomerate wasn't going to stop. They would come after her, after Robert, after everyone who had helped her. But she couldn't stop now. Not after everything they had uncovered. Not after the truth had been revealed. It was time for the final stage of the journey. They had to expose the conglomerate, once and for all. The escape from the building had been only the beginning of a long and perilous journey. Emily and Robert, barely able to catch their breath, were on the run, evading the tech conglomerate's shadowy network of security forces. Every move they made felt like a calculated risk, and every turn, every dark alley they entered, carried the weight of their mission. But more than the physical danger, it was the emotional toll that wore on Emily. The gravity of what she had uncovered was finally sinking in. They had made it out of the high-security building with just minutes to spare, but the truth was, their lives were no longer their own. Every email, every phone call, every social media post could be traced back to them. The conglomerate had resources beyond anything they had ever imagined. They weren't just after a few files anymore, they were after everything Emily and Robert had built, the movement, the truth, and, ultimately, their lives. The drive out of the city felt like a blur, the road stretching endlessly in front of them. Emily sat in the passenger seat, her mind racing. The encrypted drive containing all the evidence they had stolen from the conglomerate was safely hidden in her bag. She could feel its weight, both physical and metaphorical, pressing down on her chest. The knowledge they had gained about the conglomerate's reach was staggering. There was nothing they could do now but expose it all. But even with all the proof in the world, Emily knew that the battle was far from over. They couldn't just release the files. They needed to ensure that it would reach the right people, the people who could take down the conglomerate. They needed to get the truth to the public, to the world. But doing so would be like playing with fire. They'd be exposing not just the company's secrets but their own vulnerabilities. Emily could feel the ever-present sense of danger lurking around every corner. It was almost as if the world had become a battlefield, where one wrong move could bring it all to an end. "Where are we going?" Robert asked, his eyes on the road ahead. Emily didn't answer right away. Instead, she stared out the window, watching the cityscape blur behind them. They had to be careful. They had to plan their next move with precision. One wrong decision and everything could unravel. "We need to get to a secure location. A place we can work without being tracked," Emily replied, her voice steady but filled with an underlying tension. "I've been thinking. If we're going to release the files, we need a way to ensure it's safe from the conglomerate, and safe from anyone who might try to stop us." Robert nodded, his jaw tight. "And what about the people who are with you? Your team? The ones who helped you?" Emily hesitated. She had already begun to feel the weight of the people around her, all the lives that were now caught in this web. People who had supported her, believed in her, had put their own safety on the line. She couldn't let them down. "We'll protect them," Emily said, her voice firm. "We'll find a way. We can't give up now." For a moment, the silence between them was heavy. Emily could feel the strain between them, the shared understanding that the stakes had never been higher. She had never thought of herself as a leader, not until now. The responsibilities were suffocating, but she had come too far to back down. As they turned off the main road and into the secluded area Emily had mapped out, her thoughts shifted. The place was remote, far away from prying eyes and the web of surveillance that had followed them in the city. It was exactly what they needed to regroup. But even as she climbed out of the car, her mind was already working through the next steps. The next few hours were spent in tense planning. Robert went over the files, checking the security of their encrypted drives. Emily spent her time drafting a message that would shake the world to its core. She knew that what they had uncovered wasn't just about the conglomerate. It was about every person, every company, every government that had been complicit in the web of manipulation they had uncovered. "Are you sure about this?" Robert asked, standing by the door of the small room they had commandeered as their temporary headquarters. Emily glanced up at him. "This is the only way. If we don't release this now, they win. They'll keep doing this, keep controlling everything, and no one will even know. I can't live with that." She hit send on the final draft of the message, and a few moments later, the files began uploading to multiple secure servers. The data would be encrypted, and while it wouldn't be accessible to the public right away, the right people would know how to find it. Emily didn't know exactly how long it would take for it to go viral, but once it did, there would be no stopping the truth. But then, as the clock ticked down, Emily received an unexpected notification. Her phone buzzed with a message. "We know what you've done. You're running out of time." The chilling word sent a shiver down her spine. It was clear, the conglomerate wasn't just watching anymore. They were making their move. "Robert, they know," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It's happening. They're coming for us." The room seemed to close in around her. The walls, once her refuge, now felt like they were closing in. Emily had prepared for the worst, but the feeling of helplessness that began to creep over her was almost too much to bear. They had come so far. She had exposed the lies, the corruption, the manipulation. The world would soon know the truth. But what if it wasn't enough? "What if we can't win?" she asked, her voice breaking for the first time since this all began. She turned to Robert, her eyes full of vulnerability. "What if it's too late? What if they're already too powerful?" Robert looked at her for a long moment, his gaze unwavering. "Emily, we're already winning. You've done more than anyone else could have dreamed. And I believe we're going to bring them down. But you have to believe in it too. For the first time in a long while, Emily felt the weight in her chest loosen. It wasn't the world that needed saving. It was her belief in the fight. She had to trust that the truth would set them free, no matter the cost. As the sun began to set outside, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, Emily knew one thing for certain: the battle wasn't over. But she was ready for whatever came next. The hours that followed their breakthrough were the most tense and fraught of Emily's life. The files had been sent, and while she had no idea how long it would take for them to go public, she knew that it was only a matter of time before the conglomerate would realize what had happened. They were playing a dangerous game now, and every second that passed felt like a step closer to disaster. Robert had insisted that they move quickly. The secluded hideout they had chosen was no longer safe. Emily knew it, and Robert certainly did too. They were far from the city's eyes, but the conglomerate's reach had no boundaries. They could be watching the smallest corner of the world, and it was only a matter of time before they found their trail. "We need to disappear," Robert said, his voice grim as he scanned the surroundings. "If we stay here for much longer, we'll be sitting ducks." Emily nodded, her mind racing. But where could they go? How could they remain hidden long enough to ensure the world saw the truth? The files, though safe for now, wouldn't stay that way. They couldn't just rely on the servers they'd uploaded them to. The conglomerate would be pulling out all the stops to find them, to erase the evidence, and to destroy everything they had worked for. "How much time do we have?" Emily asked, her eyes meeting Robert's. "At most 48 hours, Robert said flatly. "After that, the conglomerate will trace us. We have to act fast." Emily's heart thudded in her chest. Time was running out. It was a race now. But this time, the chase wasn't just a literal one. It was a battle for control of the narrative, a fight to make sure the truth reached the world before the conglomerate could erase every trace of their wrongdoing. They moved quickly, changing locations and keeping off the radar. Emily had taken to using disposable phones and constantly altering their routes, making sure they didn't stay in one place too long. But no matter how much they tried to stay ahead, she could feel the pressure mounting, the inevitable crash of forces ready to converge upon them. Every knock on the door, every strange car in the distance made her heart skip a beat. They had become the hunted. "We're not safe anywhere," Emily muttered, barely able to keep the fear from her voice. But Robert, ever the optimist, tried to soothe her. "As long as we keep moving, we'll be fine. They haven't found us yet, and we're not going to make it easy for them." It wasn't long before they realized they had no choice but to go on the offensive. Emily knew she needed a safe house, somewhere they could stay long enough to get their bearings. But getting there would be tricky. Their every move would need to be calculated, precise. After what felt like an eternity of driving through winding roads and unfamiliar landscapes, they arrived at a nondescript cabin tucked away in the woods. It was the perfect place to lay low for a while, hidden enough to evade prying eyes, but accessible enough for them to get help if needed. Inside the cabin, Emily sat at a small, wooden table, her laptop open in front of her. The files were still secure, encrypted, and backed up on several different devices. But every time she logged into the server to check for updates, her stomach turned. There was no way of knowing if the conglomerate was already working to neutralize the files. If they had someone on the inside, the evidence could disappear before they even had a chance to expose it. Robert stood in the corner, scanning the news on his phone. "The world's starting to catch wind of the leaks," he said, his voice low. "But the conglomerate's already pushing back. They've labeled it a hoax, claimed it's disinformation." Emily cursed under her breath. This was exactly what they'd feared. The conglomerate had the power to spin the narrative, to manipulate the press, to make the truth seem like a lie. "We can't just sit here waiting for them to turn this around," she said, her voice laced with frustration. "We have to do something now, take the offensive." "How?" Robert asked. "What do we have left to fight with?" For a moment, Emily was silent. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as she thought. We still have the people. The media, the influencers. They can help us break the narrative wide open. But they'll be targeted too, Robert countered, his tone darkening. You saw the message. They're already hunting us down. They won't stop at anything to erase what we've done. Emily met his gaze, her resolve hardening. That's why we need them. We can't do this alone. But if we get the right people on our side, people with reach, people who will make sure the truth spreads, they'll have no choice but to listen. Emily and Robert spent the next few hours drafting an open letter, one that would bypass traditional media channels and go directly to the people. It was a plea for the public to look at the evidence, to question the narrative that the conglomerate was pushing, and to demand accountability. This is it, Emily said, pressing send. We've put everything we have on the line. Now, we wait. But waiting was the hardest part. Every minute felt like an hour, every moment full of dread. As they huddled together, watching their phones and the increasing wave of online reactions, Emily realized how truly fragile their position was. They had no guarantees. No backup plan. If this failed, everything they had done would be for nothing. Robert gave her a supportive smile, though it was strained. If we fail, at least we gave it everything we had. Emily nodded, feeling the weight of the world pressing down on her. It was all or nothing now. But even as she prepared herself for the worst, a tiny part of her held on to hope. It wasn't just about exposing the conglomerate anymore. It was about more than that, it was about bringing the truth to light, showing the world that even in the face of overwhelming power, one person could still make a difference. But would it be enough? It didn't take long for the storm to break. The morning after Emily and Robert sent the open letter, the world began to react. The first signs were subtle, an uptick in social media activity, a few prominent influencers sharing the leaked files, and murmurs from independent journalists digging into the conglomerate's activities. But soon, it exploded into full-scale chaos. The hashtag expose the conglomerate started trending worldwide, and a firestorm of news outlets began to pick up the story. Emily sat in the cabin, watching as her phone buzzed constantly with notifications. It was overwhelming. The world was finally waking up, and the truth was out there for all to see. She had expected some backlash, but what she didn't anticipate was the sheer intensity of it. The conglomerate was not going to let this go down without a fight. They're scrambling, Robert said, his face tight with worry as he scrolled through his phone. They've already launched a counteroffensive. They're discrediting the leak at every turn, calling it hacked footage, fake news, you name it. Emily rubbed her temples, trying to focus through the growing sense of panic. She had prepared for this, but nothing could truly ready them for what was coming next. The conglomerate had resources that far outstripped theirs. Money, influence, legal teams, and tech that could erase entire histories in an instant. They weren't just fighting against an evil corporation, they were going up against an entire system that controlled the flow of information. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and the power in the cabin cut out. Great, Emily muttered under her breath. Now we're in the dark, literally. Robert got up to check the breaker, but Emily could feel the rising tension in the air. This wasn't just a power failure. It was something more. Her instincts were on high alert. A loud bang echoed outside the cabin, followed by the sound of tires screeching. They weren't alone anymore. The conglomerate had found them. Get down. Emily hissed, pushing Robert toward the floor. The two of them crouched low behind the kitchen counter, heartbeats syncing with the sounds of footsteps outside. The cabin was in the middle of nowhere, far from any main roads or neighbors, which meant whoever was out there had either tracked them down through technology or through sheer luck. Neither option was comforting. The sound of the engine stopped. They were circling the perimeter, waiting. Emily's breath caught in her throat. She knew that there was no time left. If they were going to escape, they needed to do it now. Do you have the encrypted drives? Robert whispered. Emily nodded, clutching the bag that held the drives close to her chest. She didn't know how long they had before the doors were kicked in, but she wasn't going to let them take everything. If they were going down, they were going down swinging. The front door creaked open, and heavy boots stomped on the floorboards. Emily held her breath, hoping beyond hope that they hadn't been detected. She slowly began to edge her way toward the back window. But as she turned her head to signal Robert, she froze. In the window's reflection, she saw the shadowy figures closing in on their position. She knew then that the game had changed. This was no longer about staying one step ahead. They were in full-blown survival mode now. "We need to move," she said urgently, grabbing Robert by the arm. "This is our only shot." The two of them scrambled toward the back door, which they had fortified earlier with a few simple locks and an old piece of furniture. They pushed the door open and crept out into the woods, using the trees and underbrush as cover. Every snap of a twig beneath their feet felt like it was signaling their location, but they couldn't afford to hesitate. Adrenaline surged through Emily's veins as they ran. The forest was dense and unfamiliar, but it was their only chance. The cabin had served its purpose, but now it was nothing more than a trap waiting to spring. The figures chasing them were getting closer, their voices loud and frantic. "We can't outrun them in the woods," Robert panted, glancing over his shoulder. "We need to find higher ground. Somewhere we can see them coming." Emily barely nodded, but she understood. They needed to make a stand. They had the files, they had the truth, but if they didn't have the upper hand now, everything they had worked for would be lost. They climbed higher, scrambling up a rocky incline toward a ridge that overlooked the forest. At the top, Emily pulled out her phone, dialing the encrypted contact number they'd set up for emergencies. "There's no signal," she muttered in frustration. "We need to get out of here. I don't know how long we can keep running." Robert's face was grim, but his voice steady. "We're not done yet. We still have one shot." Just as Emily was about to respond, a voice rang out behind them. "Freeze!" They turned around, and to their horror, there were at least 6 armed men, all wearing black tactical gear. The conglomerate security had finally caught up with them. "Hand over the drives," the lead figure said, his voice cold and unwavering. "This is your last chance. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Emily's mind raced. They had no weapon, no defense, and no way of escaping this. But they had one thing left, the truth. She took a deep breath, gripping the encrypted drive tightly. "No," she said, her voice steely. "You're not taking it." The man laughed, a humorless sound. "You don't get to decide that. You've already lost." But then, as if on cue, the first wave of chaos arrived. Far off in the distance, Emily heard the unmistakable sound of helicopters. The noise grew louder and louder until the air seemed to vibrate with the force of it. "Not today," Emily said under her breath, a slight smile creeping onto her lips. She knew what was coming. The sound of sirens wailed, growing louder as multiple law enforcement vehicles emerged from the tree line, lights flashing. They were here, federal agents, the ones who had been monitoring the situation and the leaks. The conglomerate's forces, now caught between them, had no chance. The cavalry had arrived. The lead figure cursed under his breath, realizing too late that their hold on Emily and Robert had slipped through their fingers. "Move in," the man ordered. But before he could give any further instructions, federal agents swarmed the scene, guns raised. Emily barely heard the rest as everything descended into a blur of shouting, chaos, and heavy boots slamming against the earth. She didn't know if they would be safe. But for the first time in days, she allowed herself a breath of relief. The battle was far from over, but this moment was theirs. The chaos of the standoff felt like it lasted forever, but in reality, it was over in mere minutes. Emily's heart pounded in her chest as she stood frozen on the ridge, trying to process what was happening around her. Law enforcement had arrived, and the heavily armed figures from the conglomerate were being arrested, their plans dismantled in the blink of an eye. But even as the agents closed in on the situation, Emily couldn't shake the feeling of dread. There was still so much left to do, so much that could go wrong. She was waiting for something, an inevitable twist in the narrative, something that would change the course of this battle. A federal agent approached her, his expression stern but not unfriendly. He held out his hand. "Ms. Mitchell," he said, his voice low. "We need to talk. You've just caused quite the stir." For a moment, Emily didn't know how to respond. The weight of everything she'd just gone through, the adrenaline still coursing through her veins, made her feel dizzy. She nodded slowly, not sure if she could trust the man standing in front of her. But she had no choice. They were the ones who had come to their aid. "Do you know who I am?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The agent's gaze softened. "We know. And we've been following your work closely. You're not alone in this." A sense of relief washed over her, but it was quickly replaced by a deep well of uncertainty. They had made it this far, but the future was still unclear. The battle wasn't over, it had only just begun. She could feel the stakes rising with every passing second, knowing that exposing the conglomerate's secrets was just one piece of the puzzle. The world was watching, and whatever happened next would change everything. As they were escorted down the ridge toward the agent's vehicles, Emily couldn't help but glance at Robert. He was a few steps behind, his expression unreadable. She could tell that he was equally overwhelmed. They had both taken a huge risk, and while they'd won this round, the outcome was still uncertain. The agent led them to a waiting SUV, and they were driven to a nearby safe house, a nondescript building tucked away on the outskirts of town. Inside, Emily was immediately placed under protective custody. It wasn't the kind of safety she had envisioned, it wasn't a victory, not yet. But for the moment, it was enough. As they settled into the safe house, the tension in the air was palpable. Emily sat down at a small table, staring at the news coverage on a nearby television. The leaked files were everywhere. The entire world was now aware of the conglomerate's corruption, their manipulation, their greed. But that wasn't the only thing Emily noticed. The faces of the people who were standing up for justice were starting to appear, journalists, activists, whistleblowers, and everyday citizens who were making their voices heard. People were rallying. There was a collective uprising of truth. Yet, as the reports on TV swirled, Emily couldn't escape the gnawing feeling in her gut. The conglomerate was powerful. It had resources. And it would retaliate, no matter how many people stood in solidarity with her. She had seen it firsthand in the way they tracked her down, in the lengths they were willing to go to protect their secrets. They wouldn't give up without a fight. Robert entered the room, looking more tired than she had ever seen him. He had been a steady presence through all of this, and yet, even now, he seemed to be struggling with the enormity of what they had set into motion. "We did it," he said quietly, sitting down beside her. "But this is just the beginning. They'll come after us with everything they've got." Emily nodded. She had been preparing for this, mentally and emotionally, but hearing Robert's words made it feel more real than ever. The conglomerate wouldn't just go away, not after all the damage they had caused. They would fight back. The battle they were waging wasn't just against one corporation, it was a war against a system, one that had been rigged to protect the powerful and crush those who dared to expose it. But Emily wasn't going to back down. She couldn't. "I know," she said softly, her voice stronger than she felt. "But we have the truth on our side. And the truth is unstoppable." Just then, a soft knock echoed on the door. A new voice entered the room, an agent, carrying a sealed envelope. "This just came in for you," he said, handing the envelope to Emily. She glanced at Robert before opening it. Inside was a letter, a brief message from one of the key journalists she had worked with in the past. Her breath caught as she read the words, "They're already moving against you. The legal team is preparing to go after the files, erasure in progress. But you have allies. Stay safe. Your next step is crucial." It was the worst possible news. The conglomerate was already preparing its legal counterattack, and they weren't wasting any time. But the last sentence, the mention of allies, gave her a glimmer of hope. Are we just supposed to hide forever? Robert asked, his voice breaking through her thoughts. Emily felt a deep sense of resolve. No, they couldn't hide forever. They couldn't let the conglomerate win by silencing them. They had sparked a fire, and that fire was spreading. The world was watching now. We go public, she said with a fierce determination. We don't hide. We fight. We show the world that the truth is more powerful than any corporation. We make sure that the files stay in the light. They can try to erase everything they want, but the truth is already out there. As Emily and Robert prepared for their next move, the weight of what they were about to do was not lost on them. The battle was far from over. But they had already changed the course of history, and they would not stop until the truth was fully exposed, no matter the cost. In that moment, as the world outside continued to shift in response to their actions, Emily understood something deep and profound. The fight for justice wasn't just about exposing the corrupt or the powerful. It was about standing up for what was right, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. It was about showing the world that no one, no matter how powerful, was beyond accountability. This was only the beginning. Emily sat by the window, her gaze fixed on the horizon. The early morning light filtered through the curtains, casting soft beams of light on the barren landscape outside. The safe house, once a sanctuary, had become a gilded cage. For days, she had been locked away, watching the world unfold from a distance, powerless to influence it. But she knew this time of hiding couldn't last forever. The world had already seen what she and Robert had uncovered, but now came the hardest part, the real fight. The conglomerate wasn't backing down, and neither could they. She could still hear the faint echo of the reporter's voice in her head, the one who had written the letter. They're already moving against you. The legal team is preparing to go after the files, erasure in progress. The weight of that warning was suffocating. If they lost those files, if the evidence was destroyed, it would all be for nothing. But there was one thing the conglomerate had underestimated, Emily's resolve. They had underestimated how deeply she cared about what was right, about making sure the truth didn't get buried under layers of corporate greed. Robert entered the room, his face drawn with exhaustion. He hadn't been sleeping much, and neither had she. But now, they were preparing for their final move. We have to get ahead of this, Robert said, sitting down across from Emily. He rubbed his face, frustration written all over him. We've exposed them, but they're closing in on us. Their legal team is relentless. They're getting the media on their side. Emily nodded, her mind still processing everything that had happened. She understood. The conglomerate had power, wealth, influence. They could twist the narrative, push their own version of events. They could bury everything with legal jargon, media manipulation, and strategic spin. But they couldn't erase the truth, not completely. There's one thing we still have that they can't take, Emily said softly, her eyes narrowing. The people. The public is with us. They can't spin that. Robert looked at her, his eyes sharp. He understood what she meant. We go public with everything, she said, the plan beginning to solidify in her mind. We release all of it. Every single piece of evidence, every document, every video we've got. But this time, it's not just a leak. We need to do it in front of the world. Live. Robert's eyes widened. Are you serious? We put it all out there, knowing they'll try to block it. Knowing they'll try to shut us down. Emily stood up, pacing the room, her energy ignited by the fire of resolve. Yes, we do. We've already given them a head start by letting them control the narrative. We can't let them spin the story any longer. It's time for them to face the consequences of what they've done, and we need to make sure the world knows everything. She paused, turning to face him. We've come too far to stop now. We can't hide. It's not just about us anymore, it's about the people who are counting on us to hold the powerful accountable. It's about showing the world that the truth can't be silenced. Robert stood, slowly but with the same determined fire in his eyes. All right. Let's do it. We go live. We let the world see what's really going on. They both knew the risks. Going live meant the conglomerate would know exactly where they were, exactly who was behind this monumental leak. It meant the full force of the law and corporate might would come crashing down on them. But in that moment, Emily felt more certain than ever that they had to take this risk. We'll need a secure platform, a way to stream that's impenetrable, Emily said, already calculating the logistics in her head. And we'll need a team of journalists who can corroborate the data live. This has to be done right. No mistakes. I've got connections, Robert replied. I can get in touch with some trustworthy people. We'll make sure everything is protected. The plan was set into motion. As they finalized their strategy, Emily's thoughts kept returning to the people who had been affected by the conglomerate's actions, people whose lives had been destroyed, whose voices had been silenced for far too long. They were counting on her, on Robert, on anyone who was willing to stand up for what was right. And Emily couldn't let them down. The day arrived. The countdown to the live broadcast began. Emily and Robert, with their team of trusted allies and journalists, set up in a secure location, far away from the prying eyes of those who would try to stop them. Emily sat at a table, surrounded by monitors, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Robert sat beside her, watching as the stream setup finalized. They were moments away from making history, from unveiling the truth in real time, for the entire world to see. As the camera rolled, Emily's heart raced, but her mind was clear. This was it, the moment that would define everything. The evidence, the proof of the conglomerate's corruption, would be shown in its full, horrifying glory. The data was irrefutable. And as the screen flickered to life, broadcasting to millions of viewers across the globe, Emily spoke. Good evening, she said, her voice steady but laced with the weight of what was to come. I am Emily Mitchell, and I am here tonight to expose the truth. The truth that the powerful have tried to bury for far too long. The truth that the conglomerate would rather you never knew. Tonight, we will show you everything. The images on the screen began to shift, showing documents, footage, and data that had once been locked away in the dark recesses of the conglomerate's offices. There was no spin, no rhetoric, just the facts. The dirty deals. The illegal actions. The harm that had been done to people's lives, their futures. We've fought for this moment, Emily continued. We've risked everything to bring you the truth. And we will not stop until justice is served. As she spoke, a flood of messages began to appear on the screen. Comments from people all over the world, outraged, shocked, but also, increasingly, inspired. The truth was out, and the world was taking notice. Hours passed as they streamed, answering questions from journalists and legal experts who helped interpret the data. The entire world was watching, and the weight of that responsibility was immense. But it was also incredibly empowering. For the first time, Emily felt like she wasn't fighting alone. The truth had taken on a life of its own, and it was carrying them forward. By the end of the broadcast, the world had already begun to react. Protests sparked in major cities. Lawmakers from different countries demanded investigations into the conglomerate's practices. People from all walks of life, ordinary citizens, activists, and public figures, rallied around the cause. It was no longer just Emily and Robert against the conglomerate, it was the people of the world against the corruption that had held them all back for so long. As the broadcast concluded and the cameras powered down, Emily leaned back in her chair, exhausted but relieved. Robert sat beside her, his eyes tired but proud. It's done, he said softly. Emily nodded, feeling the weight of their accomplishment wash over her. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. But this was the moment they had been waiting for, the tipping point. The truth had been revealed. And there was no going back. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?